Hey, Live All Good podcast listeners. This next episode of Move the Needle for February is a very important and somewhat heavy topic. We address the economics and the cost of racism. That in depth discussion is coming up next. Hey folks, this is Lee Grigsby here, health and life coach and founder of Live All Good Coaching. I'll be on the air with Podcast Business News Network talking about the various things around health and wellness and mental health. Also talking about how mindset is critical to achieving the goals that you set for yourself. You can reach me at liveallgood44@gmail.com, or you can go to my website, liveallgood.com, and fill out the contact form and reach me there. Once again, that's liveallgood.com. Go to the About section, fill out the contact form, or you can reach me at liveallgood44@gmail.com.
Welcome back from that break, everybody. This is the Move the Needle podcast. I am one of your hosts, Lee Grigsby. I am here with my co-host, J.R. Ford. J.R., how are you, man?
I am doing incredibly well. How are you, sir?
I like it. Incredibly well. Not just well, incredibly well. I like
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Got to put it out there in the atmosphere. So
Well, then I have to say that I'm doing absolutely positively great.
fantastic.
Hey, right? The power of positive thinking, like you
That's
said, you
right.
have to put it out there.
That's right.
So folks, wow, I can't believe we're a month in, right? This is February now, and we're a month into 2022.
Yeah.
So hopefully, things are going well for you wherever you are, wherever you're listening from. But this month, we want to take a different turn with Move the Needle. Well, not too different. But in the past, you've heard Move the Needle address things like social issues, racism from a social front, from a social aspect, from a personal aspect, right? From a mental and emotional aspect. Well, this month we are going to talk about the cost of racism, and that is from an economic standpoint. These a lot of the research and numbers and all kind of stuff. It's kind of mind-boggling, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
JR, what do you think? So from
Yeah.
what you've read, what you've
Ooh.
researched, what do you think?
Oh, wow. We always talk about racism from a personal standpoint, right? We have all
Mm-hmm.
these stories about
Mm-hmm.
the in front of you type of overt racism. But,
Mm-hmm.
just reading and listening to the material that focused a lot on the cost and the value of racism, both in a structural standpoint, so looking at policy,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then looking at it from an economic standpoint, you know, really kind of drives home the fact that we're in this community, we're in this society for really big reasons. And
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the impact that has happened, that the data shows
Mm-hmm.
um, about the wealth gap and all these other imposed limitations on a major part of society, it's really eye-opening. So for me, it was kind of reinforcing the
Mm-hmm.
why part of why is this happening? Why are we where we are today in society?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Both from a community standpoint as well as from an economic standpoint. So I'm really, as you can tell, I'm really excited to get into this conversation.
Well, And like before we jump into a lot of the research that we've done
Yeah.
and the material, like you hit a really good point. The why, right? It
Yeah.
really hit home with the why.
Yeah.
And so, man, what I want our listeners to really, really pick up on and connect the dots with when you now hear, or well, after you hear what we talk about today or this episode, when you start hearing the term of institutional racism, right? When it is the institutions and the foundation, you will start to understand that it was built this way. It was intentional to
Right.
to do the things that it's been doing.
Right.
So people systemic racism. When people talk about the system is broken, no, it's not.
No, it's working just the way
And
it was planned.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it is really, like you said, eye opening.
Yeah.
Um, so man, let's jump into it, right? I
Yeah.
think where we both started was with another podcast that we
Yeah.
listened to. It's called what is it? Black History for White People, correct?
Right.
That's the
Yep.
name of the podcast.
Yep.
And they had an episode called "The Cost of Racism." They got, ooh, boy, um, after you listen to this episode of Move the Needle, I really advise you to go listen to that episode because
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, they went deep with it.
And they connected it
Um,
all together, which is,
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
the piece, you know.
being able to connect the dots, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so hopefully we can kind of do the same. Excuse me. Um, but I want to talk about a few things that they mentioned in that podcast, and we can discuss it here.
Yeah.
Um, like I just want to start with this is one thing that rang out to me is that racism and white supremacy itself, right?
Yeah.
Racism operates on this zero sum idea.
Right.
And if you don't know what a zero sum idea is, let me put it to you this way. Um, it's the thought of the only way that I can grow or the only way that I can succeed is by keeping you down.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it.
There's no alternative. There's no, well, maybe we can work together. No. The zero sum idea is the only way that I can succeed, prosper, do
Right.
well, grow, fill in the blank
Yeah.
is by keeping you down.
Right.
Okay? That's critical to understanding a lot of
Yeah.
the material and the
Yeah.
statistics.
Yeah.
It I hate to say it this way, but it begins to make a whole lot of sense, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about it was either a part of this podcast or I
Mhm.
listen to I listen to a lot of other podcasts too. But one of the things that when you talk about that zero sum game and my succession is based on you not succeeding
Mhm.
is that this whole kind of premise and kind of thought and ideology came about because of what? Because of slavery. Because
Mhm.
slavery was a huge economic driver for
Mhm.
this country. So
Mhm.
when you have free labor and you have also poor whites,
Mhm.
because at that
Mhm.
time, there was
Mhm.
if you were a landowner, you probably had much more wealth than someone who was, either subleasing, parts of land
Mhm.
and all
Mhm.
that stuff. So in order for there to be this structure in place, the wealthier landowners and white people had to figure out a way of how do I differentiate enslaved Africans from
Mhm.
poor white people in this
Mhm.
structure. Because if we're to grow, the country, in and of itself, and create this economic driver, how do I keep those poor whites from not feeling that they are equal because they're getting, low wage. They're seen
Mm-hmm.
as subservient and inferior. How do I differentiate that? Well, guess what? They
Yeah.
made they hired
Yes.
on those poor
Say it.
white people to
Yes. Yes.
manage slaves as
That.
overseers. So that's
Yes.
how that whole structure started to come about. And so when you start
Mm-hmm.
to see that whole navigation through post-slavery about, how do we continue to make sure that, the white people, and I'm using this in general terms, people who
Mm-hmm.
came, people who enslaved people, enslaved Africans, and those who benefited and profited off of that in every part of society.
Mm-hmm.
So, so to distill that down, how do you keep those newly freed Africans and African Americans from feeling as though they are equal? Well,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? They didn't have anywhere else to go after slavery ended. They didn't own land. They were generally undereducated,
Mm-hmm.
underserved. So what
Mm-hmm.
do? You have them become sharecroppers and basically continue the economic prosperity of a lot of those industrial level plantations. So
Yeah.
that's the
You
historical context.
and right, and you also, and like you said, they become sharecroppers. So what happens is, and along those same lines, so it's no longer free labor, right?
Yeah,
Because legally they cannot be enslaved.
right,
So what are the constructs then put in place so that it is almost impossible
yeah,
for the newly freed slaves to reach the same level as the poor white people or the elites who were the plantation owners.
right.
That's when you start, um, again, the cost
Yeah,
of
we're talking about
renting.
economics. Yeah, we're
Yes.
talking about economic context of
the,
racism from
the
from
the
yesteryear.
cost
Yeah,
the cost of how much they had to pay
yeah,
to share the land, right? They got nothing from it.
right.
All of the proceeds went back to the landowners. That's basically the same thing that was happening before.
Yeah, yeah. And if you tried to pay, if if wages were a real, legitimate thing
Hmm.
back then, where if they were sharecropping or leasing land from,
Hmm.
a plantation, the essentially the laws back then, or what was the loosely based laws,
Sure.
really weren't enforced about paying a
A
adequate
fair wage.
wage and
Hmm.
what would be the reciprocity of that landowner not
Hmm.
paying? What what would the the
there was
sharecropping
no.
black
That's
people?
right.
Yeah, are the
There was
cops are gonna come? Nope.
no consequences. No
Yeah, there's
consequences.
no consequence. Actually, there's adverse consequence.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What would
So
happen
anyway,
is
yeah,
they would take the side of the landowner and say, "Oh, well, you got to go find some other land to sharecrop or use." That I want to say, I want to jump in here real quick.
yeah, yeah,
That's also part of it too, right?
yeah,
God forbid these freed people try
yep.
to find their own land. Well, who kept all the records
And
of
we're
who
and we're
owned the
not
land?
yeah, and we're not saying that this happened to every single freed person
Slaves.
back
Yeah,
then.
this
But
is just
this
the
was a
majority.
broad, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this was a broad approach that was applied across the majority of this country,
It's
even in the
how
north.
it's how the system started to fall into place. That's what we're
Right.
talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So, talking about that point, okay, I've got some notes here I want to read.
Yeah.
This is
Go
from
for it.
this is from the Cost of Racism episode from Black History for White People.
Yep.
What they said was the former Confederate states today are lagging behind the rest of the country in most measurable statistics.
Yeah.
So what they started doing is they went county by county, okay, in these former Confederate states. And the states that relied heavily on slavery
Hmm.
in 1860 have a lower per capita income. Well, and this was in the year 2000.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me say that again. The former Confederate states are lagging behind the rest of the country in just about all the measurable
Right.
statistics.
Yeah. Yep.
County by county, the counties that relied heavily on slavery in 1860 have a lower per capita income in 2000.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Yeah.
But that's
Consistently.
because,
Yeah.
yes, well, in that right there ties into something I want to introduce right now.
Yeah.
It's called this idea of last place aversion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Or like we were talking about this zero sum thought.
Yep.
So politically and legislatively, systemically, in order to keep non-white people from being equal, those in power, the elites, if you will, preferred to destroy the system instead of letting it be equal and equitable. Right. And the problem with white supremacy is that it accuses black and brown people, right, of being undeserving of these benefits. And they use very wise propaganda, as they do now.
Yeah.
Very wise propaganda to get these poor white people who would benefit from the very same things,
yeah,
to think that the black and brown people are going to benefit and be better.
Yeah.
So if a black and brown person is going to be better than me, oh no, I can't let that happen. I need to vote for this person who is spouting this policy because it's going to keep things as it is.
Right. Which means economics, which means
right,
community services.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're talking
Schools,
about the economics.
libraries.
Yeah, we're talking about the cost of racism.
Services. Yeah. It's that's the sad part, because people, the poor white people, or who don't really think it through, right?
Right.
They're tied to a certain identity.
Yeah.
And the white supremacists are using that identity that they're tied to with their propaganda to really keep everyone down.
Yeah.
It's not just hurting black and brown people. It's just hurting black and brown people more disproportionately.
Yeah.
Because there's never been a chance to even get even.
Yeah.
To get to a level playing field.
Right.
So, so I want to drop another. You talked about services, right? And what I want to. This is another another statistic coming from that episode of Cost of Racism, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So this is from a study that was done in 1857 of public institutions in free states versus slave states. Okay?
Yep.
So Pennsylvania at the time had 393 libraries. South Carolina, had 26.
Crazy.
393 libraries to 26.
Yeah.
So if what we're talking about, again, economically, the cost of racism, well, what is the number one way to combat poverty? Is education.
Yeah.
And if you do not have a public library that admits everybody.
Should, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It should admit everybody.
Yeah.
So 393 libraries in Pennsylvania, 26 in South Carolina. In Maine, they had 236 libraries. Georgia had 38. Public libraries.
Yeah.
I want to drop one more statistic, and then I'll turn over to you for a second.
Yeah.
We talk about schools, right?
Yeah.
I just mentioned education.
Right.
State of New Hampshire had 2,381 public schools.
Wow.
Mississippi had 732. Yeah.
Wow.
Let
Yeah.
that. So, and again, we're not. There's
Yeah.
not. We're not talking about they only had 732 schools because they had less people.
No,
No, they had people living there.
there were more people, and probably fairly still more people in those
Mm-hmm.
southern states than there are
Mm-hmm.
in those three, northern states. And,
Sure.
you know, forever. Like I
That
mean,
that
like,
is just, so that
yeah,
is one way that
yeah,
when you talk about public institutions, that
resources.
is part of the
Yeah,
system that has been created.
yeah.
That is
And
one way to keep the disparity between
yeah,
elites
yep,
and black and brown people, but it also hurts everybody.
right. If you keep the resources from the
Mm-hmm.
people who need them most,
Mm-hmm.
that will continue these systems,
These gaps. Yeah.
of poverty, of
Mm-hmm.
under-resourced, of underrepresented in government
Mm-hmm.
and public services, you
Mm-hmm.
name it. And the other thing that jumped out to me
Mm-hmm.
was, those three northern states, they are predominantly white, you
Yeah.
know, and that's just a fact of the matter. I
No,
mean,
you're right.
I
You're
live
right.
in New England, so
You're right.
I'm very aware.
They
Um,
are predominantly white. Exactly. And I'd be
yeah.
willing to say that the three states, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, may not be predominantly white, but if they are, I
Mhm.
guarantee they have a lot of black people living there too.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There
Mm-hmm.
are more black people and African Americans in one of those southern states than there are combined in three of the states you named. So you can see
Yeah.
why. You can see why because
Mm-hmm.
those southern states, main economic drivers were
With slavery.
agriculture and
Yeah.
slavery, and
Yeah.
they drove each other. And what happens when you have a bunch of free, people, who
Mm-hmm.
want some resources, who need them? Well,
If we keep it from them, yeah, they won't catch up to us.
right, yeah. So again,
Yeah.
we're talking about the economy, the cost of racism, the value, just not just not monetarily, but
Yeah.
also um, as a country, you know.
Absolutely. Quick question for you, Jr.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if you have this in your notes, and if you're going to talk about it, I will
Hmm.
let you.
Yeah.
Do you remember the statistics on the patents?
Oh,
I
man.
if you don't have that in your notes, I just want to drop this
I
little
don't have
nugget.
the actual
Okay.
data, but I do remember that portion of the conversation.
Yes.
And
So let me.
yeah, go
I
ahead,
will.
go for it.
I will give you that statistic.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about economic drivers and innovation, right? What 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 patent really tells you about an economy is that people invent products, right? They invent something, it gets patented, and then it gets mass produced.
Yeah.
The inventor is not really the benefactor, right?
Right.
The benefactor is the society at large, the
Yep.
country.
Yep.
Okay. So, because of white supremacy, and I think the number was there were 1,100 patents that did not get filed by black inventors.
That's insane.
I'm sorry, in I believe that was in
18.
1870 something. I don't have
Yeah.
the date. I have to
Yeah.
go back and
But
listen.
right as
But
Reconstruction was happening.
yes,
Yeah.
so during Reconstruction, there were
Hmm.
1,100 patents that did not get filed. And
Yeah.
again, we talked about what was their recourse, right? Or why wouldn't
Right.
someone invent something and file a patent for it?
Right.
Because they realized, oh, number one, this is going to make me stand out.
Yeah.
Number two, if I stand out as, I'm becoming better than, there's going to be, shall we say, repercussions, even as
Yeah.
deadly as death. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, what black people did, they did not file the patent. They just kept it quiet, and it was uh, kept under wraps what they were doing.
Right. Or they were either recommended not to, like you said,
That mm-hmm,
they
mm-hmm,
were recommended because of the economic, not for them, but for the economic prosperity of the freed black people.
mm-hmm,
When again, when if you can see it, you can be it, right?
mm-hmm,
If you see
mm-hmm,
someone who is in a high profile position, such as, for us, it's, we're looking at entertainers and,
sure.
high profile people, and kind of, in celebrity. But back
Mm-hmm,
then, as
mm-hmm,
if you were in this, I would say a fairly small group of critical thinkers back then,
sure,
where
sure.
you were, Lewis Latimer, he was
Mm-hmm,
involved in,
mm-hmm,
developing the modern light bulb. You know,
mm-hmm,
if you look at those small pocket of critical thinkers, they were brave, they were courageous because
mm-hmm,
they knew the repercussions if, when they filed those patents
mm-hmm.
that it would bring to them. Like you said, they didn't want the spotlight because there was a safety risk involved
Concern.
with
Yeah.
bringing that attention to you. But
It,
they did it for the betterment of
mm-hmm.
this country. And
and
so,
and even
yeah.
oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, 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 I'm finished. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, even bringing it back to an economic standpoint,
Yeah.
out of those 1,100 patents,
Hmm.
you talk about generational wealth.
Yeah.
Now I don't have the exact number, but it was in the billions of dollars that could have been generated for the country over time and for those people with the patents and their families.
Right.
So when you're talking about why there's not generational wealth in the black community, it's never been allowed to happen
Yeah. And
systemically.
yeah, yeah, systemically has not been allowed to happen. We have these incredible success stories. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you think of Madam C.J. Walker, as one of
Mm-hmm.
the first millionaires and first black millionaire. That is just one of the great accomplishments that you don't hear about, on a
Mm-hmm.
broad scale. I mean,
It's
she
scratching
was
the
taught
surface.
about, yeah, she
Yeah.
was taught, when I was young, and probably,
Mm-hmm.
when you were young, but those were what we hear today is about Black history. We hear
Mm-hmm.
about these, what I would consider these godly figures, in the
Mm-hmm.
Black community. That's
Mm-hmm.
where they've been anointed to. But you
Sure.
don't hear a lot about these incredible people who, they strived in
Mm-hmm.
spite of,
It's
the
exactly the
risk,
times and
you
and
know?
and the yes, and like that's why this episode is important to us, especially during Black History Month,
Yeah.
um, because you don't hear this aspect, you don't hear this side of the story,
Yeah.
and I can say that little by little we are starting to learn about more of
Yeah.
the greatness
Oh, yeah.
of these people who should never have been pushed aside or
Successful.
pushed
Yeah.
under,
Should
you know?
yeah, we should have never been successful. That's the whole
That's
thing. That is the
the
whole thing.
mm-hmm.
You
And we
know?
have been in spite of it. That's what's
Yeah.
insane,
Yeah.
you know?
And to kind of just to hit home on just on my example of Madam C.J. Walker, she was an
Mm-hmm.
apprentice to someone else,
Mm-hmm.
another black icon or person who was already in the beauty sector. So
Mm-hmm.
she came from somewhere where she had the ability, she had the resources. She pulled all that together with, her community to
Mm-hmm.
create this company. And that is one of the continuing shining lights that we need to continue to burn. But we also need to
Mm-hmm.
think about those who couldn't
Yes.
because of the structures in place. We could have had a much wider economic prosperity if we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have racism.
It,
If
it,
you know,
yes.
but
It,
yeah,
it'd be so much more equitable. The playing field would not be the gap would not be as wide right
Right.
now, today,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So um, I want to take a break, but if you have something else before the break, let me know.
Oh, go for it. I think we're
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Okay, so cool. Let's take a break here because, folks, when we come back from the break, we have some other staggering statistics that will follow up with the cost of racism and why it is detrimental for everyone. So stay tuned, kind of digest what we just went through, and we'll be back after the break.
Hey folks, this is Lee Grigsby here, health and life coach and founder of Live All Good Coaching. I'll be on the air with Podcast Business News Network, talking about the various things around health and wellness and mental health. Also talking about how mindset is critical to achieving the goals that you set for yourself. You can reach me at liveallgood44 at gmail.com, or you can go to my website, liveallgood.com, and fill out the contact form and reach me there. Once again, that's liveallgood.com. Go to the About section, fill out the contact form, or you can reach me at liveallgood44 at gmail.com.
All right, folks, welcome back from the break. Wow, a lot of heavy stuff, but stay with us. Stay with us. This is the February episode of Move the Needle. We are your co-hosts, not coast, co-hosts Lee and JR. This episode we've been talking about the cost of racism, and I hope you were able to take away from that first segment just how detrimental racism is to the entire country from a prosperity perspective. Okay, so JR, man, let's not waste any time. Let's jump right back
Yeah.
in.
Let's go for it.
I want to introduce some statistics that I found on the U.S. Census website. Okay, so this is also why the census, when they come around and they start tracking, you need to be counted. This is why. This is why you need to fill this stuff out. And folks, just to let you know, this information was not difficult to find. I literally call it 3 clicks, right?
Yeah.
You Google U.S. Census website, you kind of look at it. Now, they have a ton of statistics. They have a ton of measurables, right? The government looks at all of this. So this information is not secret, okay? But the first thing I want to introduce or talk about is just the poverty status, okay? Now, I'm going to talk about it from the year of 1967
Mm-hmm.
up to the year of 2019, okay? Because I kind of don't count the pandemic years right now. It's been kind of rough, so we're going to discount those at the moment, all right? Although they probably count way more. So back in 1967, when you consider all people, this is broken down into 3 categories. It's just all people, or families, or then families with the women as the head of the household. Okay, there's no spouse for the woman, all right? So back in 1967, 14.2% of all people were below the poverty line. Now, and I did not write down the figure of what the poverty line was, okay? So when you just talk about families, right? So this will discount single people. But just for families, 12.5% of families were below the poverty line. And then with women as the head of the household, 38.8% of those households were below the poverty line. That was in 1967, okay? When you start breaking it down into race, I only looked at the statistics for white people and black people. They broke it down into Hispanic. They broke it down into Asian. Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So in 1967, 11% of white people were below the poverty line. 9.2% of white families were below the poverty line. And 28.5% of women, of families, white families with women as the head of the household were below the poverty. Okay. Now we go to black people in 1967. 39.3% of all black people were below the poverty line.
Wow.
As far as black families, 38.4% were below the poverty line. Okay.
Yep.
And with black people, with the women as the head of the household, 61.6% were below the poverty line.
Almost 2/3.
That's 1967.
Yeah.
So let's just give that some historical context real quick before I give the 2019 statistics.
Yeah.
That's a few years removed from the Civil Rights Act, Voting Act, right?
Yep.
Not too far, either the same year or 1 year before the Fair Housing Act.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
1967 is not that far.
No. No.
That's not long ago. Okay? So let's just put it this way. There are plenty of people who were born in 1967. Okay?
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Plenty of it. This is, it's
I
not
might
like,
know some.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I know plenty.
That's
So
only one generation.
It's not, it's insane, these numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me move on to 2019. Okay. The same categories.
Yep.
We start with all people and families, and then households with women as the head of the household. Okay. So in 2019, the all people that were below the poverty line, it was 10.5%. So okay, got better from 14.2% in 1967 to 10.5. All families who were counted on the census and below the poverty line, that was 8.5%. Okay, so again, improvement from 1967. I would hope so. Women as the head of the household, all races, no breakdown, 24.3%. So that's an improvement from the 38.8%. All right.
Yep.
So now when we start breaking down, and I again only looked at the white only and black only.
Yeah.
In 2019, the amount of white people, the percentage was 9.1% of white people were below the poverty line. When you consider families, it was 7.1% of white families.
Wow.
And when you consider the women as the head of the household as white families, 21.6%. So that's still a lot, but that's still improvement. Okay. All right. Hopefully you're sitting down.
I'm sitting down.
Okay. All right. I don't even want to say this number because I kept going over it and I kept looking at the table.
Right.
I'm like, this can't be right. So in
Yep.
2019, the amount of black people that were below the poverty line, 18.8%. All people, okay?
Yep.
All blacks.
Yep.
The amount of black families below the poverty line, 17%.
Wow.
The amount
Almost
of
1/5. Yeah.
the amount of women, excuse me, as women as the head of the household for black families, 29.5%. So let me just stop here for a second, and before I get any listeners or naysayers who say, well, look, it was a great improvement. 1967, all black families were at 39.3%. Now they're at 18.8%. That's not the point I'm trying to raise. The difference from 1967 for all white people, or this even white families, right?
Yeah.
9.2%. to 7.1%. Yeah, that's a few percentage points. And 38% of Black families in 1967 is still at 17% in 2019.
Right. Yeah.
Like
It
like
went
that's
from 1 in every 3 people to now 1 in every 5 Black people.
right.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
18% for all Black people
Mm-hmm.
being counted, and 17% for Black families.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I mentioned this one, but 29.5% for women, Black families with women as the head of the household
For 2019.
for 2019. Correct.
Wow.
That's,
Yeah. So all those statistics, if you look at them in terms of the people who you may know or people in the Black community, those are, that's pretty staggering, because
that's a
in
lot.
1 in every 5 people that you may know or you see on the street, especially
Mm-hmm.
in the Black community, are below the
Is below the
poverty line.
poverty line.
Yeah.
So let me help hit that home a little bit further. I looked at again on the census website
Mm-hmm.
the income, the average income of a household. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I used the same years, 1967 and 2019, and so the first income I looked at was under 50,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and they have a really good breakdown. They break it down very sequentially with
Mm-hmm.
with the amount of income, but I just used these two.
Yeah.
So under 50,000 in 1967, all races, the amount of people who made under 50,000 was 17%. Okay, and that's pretty standard when you break it down for white people and for Black people in 1967. Okay.
Yeah.
White people was 17.1% and Black people was also 17%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you take the amount of people who make under 50,000 in 2019, all races, no breakdown, is 11.6%.
Yeah.
Okay. For white people, it jumped up to 11.4%.
Yeah.
Black people, 13.5%. Okay. So I just want to point out that you still see a gap there, right? While in 1967, the amount of white and Black people who were making under 50,000 was about equal.
Right.
In 2019, why is it that there's more Black people who make under 50,000 than there's white people?
Yeah.
Think about that.
Why?
Right?
Yeah. Why the employment,
Mm-hmm.
issues and disproportionate gap?
Because
Why is that?
if you look at just those numbers I talked about just now,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when you look at all races, so the amount of white people in all races was pretty even, 11.6%, 11.4%,
Mm-hmm.
and all of them were pretty even in 67.
Yeah.
Why is it 13.5% for Black people still under 50,000? Why wouldn't it have moved the same way? Right?
Yeah.
So there's one more income number I want to talk about.
Yeah.
This is the income under 15,000.
Yeah.
1-5. Okay. Now, there are, yeah. It's how are you going to survive making 15,000?
Yeah. I was like, you can't get taxed on $15,000 these days,
Right.
right? I don't think you can.
But just listen to these statistics. This is even worse.
All right, go for it.
So then in 1967, all people, 14.5% were making 15,000 or less.
Wow.
When you consider white people at 1967, 13.3% were making that or less.
Yep.
Black people was 26.4%.
Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah.
In 1967.
Yep.
Fast forward to 2019.
Mm-hmm.
All people, no breakdown, 8.9% of people were making under 15,000.
All right.
When you break it down for white people, 7.6% of white people make under 15,000. Okay.
Yep.
It's like I can't look at this, but I can't look at this and not have a sigh,
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you take Black people in 2019 making under 15,000 a year,
Mm-hmm.
17%.
No. It went from
17%.
26 to 17.
17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
17. 2019, man.
yeah.
And so, yeah, when we're talking about the economic standpoint of the cost of racism and building generational wealth and having this wealth gap, and then you start adding on the educational gap
Right.
because the resources aren't given
That's right.
because of what we mentioned before, last
Yeah.
place aversion or the zero sum theory, right?
Yeah.
That the only way I can prosper, the only way I can grow is to keep you down.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we've talked about this before on many other episodes. Redlining, the school redistricting to get resources to certain schools.
Yep.
That's how all this begins to work.
Yeah.
We're not even talking about, I want to mention one thing.
Yeah.
When we started talking about the poverty status, right?
Yeah.
With the women as the head of the household with no spouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if the black women have spouses, or not even spouses, but if the black
Significant
men
others,
are,
right? Yeah.
if the black men are disproportionately in prison, in jail,
Yeah.
how are they able to be productive citizens in maybe a spouse to help the income level of the household?
I'll even add on to that. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for for black families who were on assisted or supplemental income or low
Mm-hmm.
income and receiving either I think either I actually think it's federal
It is.
federal aid.
They had that was on the table that
Yeah,
I was looking at. I
yeah.
just didn't include it in my statistics.
Yeah, so one of the stipulations that I
Mm-hmm.
believe that was still in place in the 60s and in the 70s and maybe even in
Mm-hmm.
through the 80s um, was that the father figure or the head of the household was not permitted to reside in the same domicile.
Mm.
So in order for
Mm.
you to receive federal aid,
Mm-hmm.
the man of the house could not be in the house. It
Mm.
sounds ridiculous, right?
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
sounds just idiotic. But
Well, it makes sense when you start talking about 61.6% of black families with the women of the head of the household were
right,
under the poverty line.
right, right. So
It makes complete sense.
right. So also to kind of tie in all that was
Mm-hmm.
if if a black man back in the 50s and the 60s um, was undereducated, underrepresented in local, state legislation, government,
Mm-hmm.
also had, possible criminal record.
Mm-hmm.
Those were all deemed as things that would devalue you. If
Mm-hmm.
you weren't as valuable as you could be if you had the education, if you had the
Yeah.
economic resources, if you had the stability of generational wealth to
Mm-hmm.
help yourself and help your family prosper. So,
Still to this day.
yeah, to this day, it's
Mm-hmm.
still it's still a thing because we have these um, federal policies that are still disproportionately
Mm-hmm.
devaluing non-white people. And I'm not trying
Mm-hmm.
to make it a black versus a white thing, but it's a
No,
structural
like,
thing. It's
yeah,
a
like you said,
structural thing that
and
stymies
even,
economic prosperity.
and I want to
Yeah,
piggyback on that real
yeah,
fast. It's not even non-white people. Let's
yeah,
go take it all the way back.
yeah,
It really is about non or about keeping the elite, or let's say it another way, the white male landowners,
yeah.
keeping them in power.
Right,
That's it.
right. And now we have kind of a a caste system in place where
Mm-hmm.
if even in the African American community we have this
Sure.
kind of caste system where lower income black people middle
Mm-hmm.
income and and those of significant wealth, same as
Mm-hmm.
in a non-black community, in the white community, um,
Mm-hmm.
where you think that everything, all policies are created kind of equally and are all representing,
Mm-hmm.
and they have not been, you know,
No.
either whether it's at the state level, at the local level, or even at the federal level. People think that these policies, around federal housing, around education and
Mm-hmm.
voting are there to continue to help level set. And again, you have to go back to the question of why.
Sure.
Why do we have to put these policies in place? Well,
Exactly. Right.
because of systemic inequalities that have transpired through the entire creation of this country
Mm-hmm.
that we live in. And so
Yes.
I just wanted to quickly tie that in because that also gets into a little bit of what I wanted to also talk about, which
Yeah, you
was,
have something on the
yeah,
housing, correct?
which was
Yeah.
about housing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, in addition to the podcast that we listened to, I also wanted
Mm-hmm.
to bring up an article that I was reading from MarketWatch. For
Mm-hmm.
those who aren't aware, MarketWatch is one of these websites and organizations that kind of digs more into economic data.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular article, it's penned by Jillian Berman, and she is describing the penalty of being black and how present day racism devalues black people and their property and what to potentially do about it. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely ties into everything that we've been talking about. And the
Sure.
one thing I also just wanted to highlight is that, for the non-black listeners, this may seem, if you haven't researched or read about or heard or watched something about uh, uh, inequality, whether it's, you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing all these different, um, protests that are happening around the country because of, someone being murdered or
Mm-hmm.
someone being tortured,
Mm-hmm.
or something that is happening adversely to someone in the black community. This it just didn't happen. These
Right.
things just
Right.
did not happen.
This
Um,
has been a buildup of
yeah,
generations. Well,
right,
we talked about 1967 is one generation away, right?
right, exactly.
So we're talking 4 generations, maybe
Yeah,
5
maybe,
at most.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this article helps to paint that picture, and I wanted to give you an example. So picture
Mm.
two homes
Okay.
in same size, same dimensions,
Mhm.
each built in the same year,
Mhm.
in the same relative condition, both in neighborhoods with a kind of a similar decent public school,
Okay.
and access to amenities such as libraries that we talked about earlier, and restaurants and all those stuff. But there's
Sure.
one that's worth about $50,000 less than the other house.
Okay, hold on real quick. I just want to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
sure we're pointing this out. So
Yep.
basically, you're talking about 2 houses,
Two houses.
re- relatively the same,
Yep.
same communities, same
Yep.
neighborhoods, same
Same
surrounding areas.
resources. Yep.
Right. They're comparable in every
Comparable.
way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to point
Yeah.
that out. They're
Yep.
comparable in every way.
Yep.
Okay.
So you might ask what's the key difference or what are some of the key
Sure.
differences? Well,
Sure.
the one of the key differences is that the less valuable house is
Mhm.
in a majority black neighborhood, while the other
Mm.
is in a neighborhood that has very few to no black residents.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I think you and I
Mhm.
have have a lot of lived experience with that, especially living in DC, and we lived on Capitol Hill together, and
Yep. Yep.
we were probably the handful of black people who lived on
Yes.
the street, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
we saw that like right up front,
Still,
and
still that way today. Now,
right,
I will say in all fairness, yes, it
yeah,
has become more of a mixed
yeah,
neighborhood, but
yep,
exactly your point.
yeah, yeah. So
Exactly your point.
and so one of the findings is co-authored in this research is co-authored by Andre Perry, who is a senior fellow at the
Mm.
Brookings Institution. So this is a
Mm-hmm.
non-governmental organization that does a lot
Mm-hmm.
of policy and data research.
A lot of
Um,
research. Yeah.
a lot of research. So for years, the impact of centuries of discrimination have, built this generational gap that we see
Mm-hmm.
specifically in home ownership. And what his research is really focusing is on, for example, the lower wealth in Black communities means that the housing stock, the housing inventory in Black
Mm-hmm.
communities is often seen as not as good, and the public schools tend to have less funding. Now that is general
Mm-hmm.
across the country, especially when we
Yeah.
have we have
Yeah.
predominantly Black areas. What do we typically see in urban
Mm-hmm.
settings? We see, you know, pockets
And,
of widespread poverty, right?
yep. Yep.
You know,
Yep.
um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's all tied together. So Andre Perry, the senior fellow,
Mm-hmm.
he's describing this research, and he points to also data from just this past year from
Mm-hmm.
Freddie Mac. And for those who don't know who Freddie Mac is a pseudo federal government organization that focuses on housing policy, as well as I believe
Mm-hmm.
they also are one of the insurers for your
Yes.
loans that you take out for
Yes.
your mortgage.
The mortgage insurance. Yep.
Yeah, mortgage
Is
insurance.
that's how you're able to, as a first time homeowner or first
Yep,
time buyer, that's how
yep,
you're able to get a very
a
low
secured
percentage
loan.
rate.
Yeah,
Yeah, because
yep.
then you start paying a higher interest rate on the mortgage insurance. Yes.
Yeah. So they back the loans from the
Mm-hmm.
banks. So they secure those
Mm-hmm.
loans. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so the data indicates that homes in a majority minority neighborhood, so we can say majority Black neighborhoods, are more likely, or people of color. I'll say people of color
Mm-hmm.
now because we also have our
Sure.
Latinx and our Southwest Asian people as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
But in those neighborhoods, those majority minority neighborhoods are less likely, they're more than likely than those in majority white neighborhoods to receive appraisals that are below the price that buyers and sellers tend to agree on.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
so what that means is that
Mm-hmm.
those appraisals in those Black and people of color neighborhoods, in those POC neighborhoods, tend to be of less value than compared
Mm-hmm.
to those where the majority are white.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so he
Which,
also found, yeah, go ahead.
oh, what I say, which I want to help hammer home that point,
Yeah,
which is why it's important. We need to do an episode again about
yeah,
local involvement in your community, whether it's, I don't want to say politics, right? But
yeah.
understanding what school districts do,
Oh yeah,
understanding what your local government does, because that's where you can make the difference, people.
oh yeah,
When
yeah,
your school board
absolutely.
starts redistricting every 2 years,
Yeah,
you should ask why.
right.
Why are they drawing different boundaries to, encompass this school, but now
Yeah,
this school is cut out of the district or
right.
the boundary, right?
Yeah, you're
There is
driving
a,
you're driving resources over to another
yes.
school versus the other one.
Or if you find a school, well, it's underperformed. Why is it underperformed? Because it has no resources. Oh, so we're going
Why?
to draw the
Yeah,
boundary further away. And if it's further away, it gets less resource.
yeah.
That's a whole nother
It's
episode.
all
I'm sorry.
connected.
But
It's all
yeah,
connected. And if you
yeah.
don't have representation at the local government level, then you don't have
Mm-hmm.
a seat at the table.
and
So,
and it's all public. It's public knowledge. This
right.
is nothing secret that we're telling you.
Yeah.
This is research. This is
It's
taking
all
a
out there.
moment to actually look for this
Yeah.
stuff. You know,
Yeah.
but like I want to drive home the point.
Yeah.
You don't have to look at all the federal stuff we've looked at. Wherever you live, wherever you are,
Yeah.
you can find the statistics for your local neighborhood, your local city, whatever it is. Start getting
Yeah.
involved, because if we don't do it, it will continue to happen.
Right.
It will continue to
Right.
happen. Sorry,
So
didn't
I
mean to
just
interrupt. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. Good point. Good point. I just wanted to bring up one more thing
Sure.
about kind of the economic gap that was highlighted. And so um,
Absolutely.
so Perry also points out that, and I'm just finding it here, that
Mm-hmm.
this gap, gosh, where is it? Okay, here it is. So remember I was talking about the homes in the black neighborhood and the homes in the white neighborhood, and the home in the black neighborhood was worth about $50,000 less.
Correct.
So what Perry's research estimates is that the amount of lost equity
Mm-hmm.
is about $160 billion. So
Oh
that
my
means
gosh.
that that money, that equity, that worth is not there in the black neighborhoods. And that's a concrete material loss that people living in black communities continue to grapple with. And that's a
Mm.
metaphor for how we are
Mm.
valued overall.
Mm.
So I just wanted to let that sink in. And we are here kind of blasting people with data and with
Yeah.
these stories, but and you're probably thinking, well, why is this happening? And we're trying to describe it as best as we can
Mm-hmm.
because we have seen it firsthand,
Mm-hmm.
through our lived experiences or someone that we have known.
Mm-hmm.
And when you continue to see these stories and these
Mm.
examples on TV or on social media,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's a story that we are as a black community that we are quite familiar with. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
that people outside of that community continue to learn about what is happening and why are there ghettos? Why are there projects? Why
Mm-hmm.
why do we have generational issues with the supposed single family or single mother
Mm-hmm. Household.
household and stereotype? It's because of a broad systemic approach that has
Mm-hmm.
devalued us as a community, has
From the
devalued
beginning.
us, yeah, of living. And
Mm-hmm.
it has transferred over into the overall health of this country,
Yes.
whether
And
it's economic health, whether it's cultural health,
yes.
whether it's community health. It has
Mm-hmm.
transferred over into every facet of our community.
Yep. And that's why, like, wow, 100. Sorry, man, I'm rewinding a bit.
Yeah,
160 billion.
billion with a B.
I
Yeah.
I want to put that into perspective for people. Why is that important about that equity in the home that you own? Why is that important? It's because, so as a
Mm-hmm.
homeowner,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of know about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically, homeowners can refinance, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They will refinance to use the cash that their home has appreciated with. They will use that to pay off bills, go on
Yeah.
vacation, do whatever, right?
Yep.
Or dare I say, pay for college, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I use those examples specifically
It's the American
because,
way. It's the
yeah,
American way, right?
if you don't have that equity, if you do not have that cash, how are you going to afford the higher education that is costly, right?
Right.
How are you going to afford? So maybe you have had this home in one of the minority neighborhoods that is already devalued,
Mm.
and you're making a choice that, okay, we're in this neighborhood, the school's not that great, but we love the neighborhood, we love our neighbors, we love our community, but I
Yeah.
want my children to go to private school, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So then if you're already not making the equal amount of money at your own job, then you probably got to get a second job. So now you're spending less quality time with your family because you're spending more time working so that you can pay for their education, or you try to find another way to finance education,
Yeah.
or it just doesn't happen.
But why do you need to work two jobs? Why do you
Exactly.
need to work an additional job?
You do you see, folks? Are you putting this together? Are you tying it up? The economic impact. You shouldn't have to work two jobs in order to put your children through private school if that's your choice,
Yeah, or
right?
even put food on the table, you know?
Yeah, well, we're not even talking
Yeah,
about basics,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Right,
yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
If you
Yeah.
have to work multiple jobs to earn a decent living, then there's something
Let, let me just talk about.
systematically wrong. Yeah.
I want to just mention this statistic again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The amount of black people making under $15,000 in 2019 was 17%.
Yeah. That's almost one in five people, five black
That's
people.
why you got to work 3 jobs to put food on the table and to keep the house that
Yeah.
you're losing equity from because you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have a good school
Yeah.
because the district got redrawn and it doesn't have the resources.
Yeah. And even, from our generation or even from our parents' generation who had to
Mm-hmm.
work multiple jobs, they did that because of what? Because they didn't have enough money or resources or generational wealth, if there was any, to
Exactly.
actually give them the stability. So
Exactly.
that was thrust upon, you know, 2 generations ago, that if they didn't
Mm-hmm.
have the educational resources to go to school, to go to college, to get a higher degree,
Mm-hmm.
so that they could find a better paying job. Remember, we're talking about the cost of racism, and
The cost of racism,
yeah,
the
if
economics of it.
if you don't
Yeah.
have, a sufficient education, and you
Mm-hmm.
typically don't go beyond high school, we know that there's
Mm-hmm.
an economic difference from those who get a bachelor's degree and even a graduate level degree. The
Mm.
data is out there. The data is
It's
out there.
this is mind blowing.
And it's
Um,
exacerbated in the black community.
yes,
that's the
that's what we're
driver.
saying.
Yeah.
Right. It affects everybody,
Yeah. Oh
but
yeah.
when it's targeted towards our black and brown people, our minorities, that's why it's so much. It's very disproportionate,
Yeah.
but clearly
Yep.
it affects everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, wow, man. I have to say too. I want to make this point, and then it's just that we are not saying this happens to everyone, right?
Right.
Because thankfully, I am not, and my family is not uh, stressed with the making under 15,000,
Yeah.
and I know your family is not stressed with that.
Yeah.
But we are not in the majority.
Right.
We are not in the majority of black families, you see,
Yeah.
or minority families.
Yeah.
So that's why this is such an important topic to look at the cost of racism from a financial standpoint.
Right.
These are numbers, and there are people who are going to argue numbers and know this statistic. Go to the census website and look at the stuff yourself. Look at Brookings Institute research.
Yeah.
These are unbiased uh, numbers.
Yeah.
They just are what they are. So
Yeah.
wow, man, Jr. It's been another great episode of Move the Needle, man. I appreciate
Yeah.
your in-depth knowledge about what we have shared with our listeners today.
I try. I
Um,
try. Thank
any
you,
last
sir.
thoughts before we go?
uh, I think this was, I think, a prime target, topic for me,
Mm-hmm.
this past month, because, um, as I've gotten older, as I've gotten wiser, and I've gotten a little bit more worldly, about myself, and understanding why are the way we are, as
Mm-hmm.
a human being, as an individual. Um, it has now kind of started to seep in about, hey, there are things that are wrong for a reason. There are
Mm-hmm.
reasons why people who look like me are in the situations that they are. And
Mm-hmm.
we really do need to continue to address them, but we
Mm-hmm.
really do need to have some type of approach where we're not just, kind of a pun on this podcast is move the needle. At the national level, we should not
Sure.
be moving the needle. We should be
Right.
making strides. We should be
Right.
making measurable steps. Have we
Right.
made measurable steps from the 60s, with all the legislation and policy? I I would say yes and considerably no.
I think, I think it's
Yeah,
debatable. It is
yeah,
debatable what measurable strides are.
yeah,
Um, yeah, no, I agree with you, man.
yeah,
I again, like I appreciate your the in-depth research that you brought to this episode. And folks, like let's drop it here with this one, right?
yeah.
These are the statistics. These are the numbers. These are the financials of the cost of racism, right? But remember, you have a choice. Once you now have information on what is, and you have an idea of what it can be or what it should be for equity for people in
Hmm.
general, right?
Yeah,
Well, now the choice is yours. The choice is yours. You have that ability to say, you know what? I can no longer be a bystander. I need to do something, right? Because not doing anything until it hits your doorstep is
it's too
just
late.
as bad
Yeah,
as creating this inequity, you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
So now you have a choice. I encourage, I advise, I challenge our listeners. Go insert yourself in your local, not necessarily politics. I'm not telling everybody run for city council. I'm not telling everybody run for governor. Not that kind of thing. But what I'm telling you is, yes, there is a reason to be aware of what you're voting for on a local level. There is a reason to understand what school districts do, where the money goes. Like if you follow the money, you will start to understand a lot more of why things are the way they are.
yeah.
And then you have a choice on how you want to help make things more equitable.
Yep. There it is.
That's it. All right, folks, we have thoroughly appreciated you taking some time out this month to listen to Move the Needle. This was a bit of a heavy topic, but one that needs to be discussed, and we will continue to bring this type of material and more to you. You can find Move the Needle on Apple, on Google, Spotify, we're on Amazon. We're on a few other podcast platforms as well. And until next month, we wish you all well, and we will be back in March with another episode.